Hello and welcome to Coast, Real Opinions by Real Women from Sea to Shining Sea. And tonight I have with me Miss Emma from Texas
Hello.
and Miss Mary from Long Island.
Hi, everybody.
And my name is Jenny Lee. And tonight we're going to be covering the trial of Keith Raniere of Nxivm, which started in Brooklyn, New York Federal Court on May 7th, 2019. A couple of things to know. This is rumored to be a pyramid sex cult scheme and is not the first pyramid that Mr. Raniere has been involved in. There were three other trials that were set to commence prior to this one starting, and that was Claire Brofman. She's one of the Seagram heiresses, Nancy Salzman, and Allison Mack. And you'll know Allison Mack because the media always refers to Allison Mack, Smallville actress, and they never really get into the brunt of anything past this, and they certainly haven't been giving anybody coverage on this. So Claire Brofman pled guilty after pleading not guilty. She will be sentenced on July 31st. Nancy Salzman pled guilty after pleading not guilty. She will be sentenced on July 10th. Allison Mack pled guilty after pleading not guilty. She will be sentenced September 11th. She's facing over 40 years in a federal prison. This is her first trial. This trial will be conducted first on the level of Nxivm and then on the level of DOS. And as we work through this, we hope to explain it to you in the best way to make you understand this very complicated, far-reaching global issue. But before we get started, I just want you to know how far-reaching and globally this is. There were 60 other companies associated with Nxivm and ran by the upper echelon, but they also operated out of 12 centers globally: Albany, New York City, Miami, Florida, Los Angeles, California, Orange County, California, Seattle, Washington. There were 3 in Mexico, including Guadalajara, Mexico City, Monterrey. There was a center in London, Vancouver, which was one of the largest ones, and Guatemala City. So that's going to bring us to day 1 with opening statements. And the trial started on May 7th, 2019. So I know that we've all been following along and reading this through various sources, including some Twitter follows of some court watchers and reading frankreport.com. And there's also a podcast if you are interested in getting updated at CBS. Just Google CBS Nxivm podcast and you'll be able to find your way to that.
Jenny,
So,
before you start talking about the trial, I think you might want to explain for people who might not know, like Nxivm is, NXIVM, DOS. DOS stands for, was it dominant over submissive?
So Nxivm is actually a Greek take on an old Greek thing where people used to give themselves as collateral for debt that they could not afford to work off. And that was back in the very early Greek years, but it was Nexivm, and I think Keith just put a Greek letter play to it. The pronunciation still remains the same. DOS was the inner circle that most people didn't know about until they worked their way up the pyramid. DOS is dominant over submissive, and it's a whole slave type thing. Within Keith's inner circle, he had 8 main slaves in the first tier, and each one of those slaves was required to recruit their own slaves. They had testified, I believe within the first week, it was Sylvie who had testified that, it was Sarah Edmondson had given it on one of the podcasts, that each one of the slaves was starting to then be required to recruit up to 100 slaves each. And of course, those slaves would also have to recruit. One of the men who gave one of the most great testimony, he's a filmmaker by the name of Mark Vincente. He had said he himself had recruited over 2,000 members, not necessarily as slaves, but that just shows you the level of recruitment within the pyramid from just a few people and how really far-reaching this is.
Okay, when did DOS and Nxivm begin? Do you know when they started their programming?
Well, it's probably better to go through this as the trial unfolds. I think that that's the easiest way to do it, because when the first person who comes up as a witness, her name is Sylvie, and she explains the recruitment process. And then Mark Vincente comes in, and he talks about the financials and also the history, which dates back to when Keith first had his very first pyramid scheme in Arkansas. And his pyramid scheme back then had gotten so big that under testimony, they had said that Bill Clinton, when he was the governor, had wanted some kickbacks from the group. And because they wouldn't do it, they started applying pressure through some,
Governors, right?
Yeah,
The governors.
Right, right. So they started bringing federal charges against them until I believe it was called CGI. But all of that we go through, and this story is just so intriguing. I'm hoping we could at least make it to the end of the first week or the second. This might be a 5-part series, but the trial is still currently undergoing right now in Brooklyn. They're up to, I believe, day 21 with the few days that they had off.
We're to week 4, week 5 at this point, right?
Yeah, it's week 4, but day 21, because they had a couple of jurors that excused themselves for the day and they closed down. But other things did happen at court that day, where they determined whether evidence was going to be admitted or not. So there's a lot of great things here that just really aren't being covered at all by the media to the extent that this should be. And this is a made-for-TV type movie. A case.
A series. It could be a 10-year arc.
So Mark Lesko, and do you know that name, Mary?
Yes. That name is quite familiar.
So he was the arresting FBI, or he was one of the persons who was in charge of taking down one of the district attorney Spada in New York.
Yeah.
Mark Lesko, he's the New York attorney for the Eastern District of New York, and he gave the opening statements. Mark Aganilfilio, he represents Keith Raniere, and from what I've been reading from the people who are there watching the court, he's actually a really good lawyer trying to do a very hard thing, which is defend the indefensible. He's basing his case around all of this being a choice made by each person to independently join. But by the time they join and move up in ranks, they have to give things called collateral. So once they already have collateral on them, it's kind of hard to back out at that point.
Well, it's basically extortion. They get dirt on them.
Yeah.
They have some kind of skeletons in their closet. And from what I understand, if they didn't have skeletons in their closet, they were made to go get skeletons in their closet so they would have collateral.
Or make it up, yeah. They had even said that they wanted to basically take over government by getting somebody into politics that was so highly collateralized that they would do whatever they told them to do. And I believe that there's already people
I believe that's already been done, yeah.
I believe they've already accomplished that.
AOC.
Do we have Operation Brownstone connected yet to Nxivm?
No, but you'll be surprised that CEMEX has been. Do you remember CEMAX, the company?
That's a cement. Isn't that a cement thing?
Yeah, it's the one where they had found down in your neck of the woods that they found the child trafficking and the rape trees, and they looked up who the owner was, and they found that the CEMEX company had been given a lot of large donations to the Clinton Foundation.
No, they have an arm in Texas, big company headquarters in Texas, mainly in Mexico, and they were trying to get in on the contract for the wall. Just so you know.
Oh wow!
Wow. Okay, so they get up and they basically cover, that this is why we want to jail him for blackmail, for human trafficking, for all this stuff. And his defense attorney, Mark Aganilfilio, says, I'm going to defend him no matter what, because that's my job to be a good defense attorney. And then they call up their first witness. Their first witness, her name is Sylvie. Prior to that, right after opening statements, it was the first mistrial. I think we're up to the third mistrial that's been called on the defense's side. And it was requested and later denied because they had used last names in some of the witnesses and those people weren't meant to be on trial because they've made deals. There's a lot more of a flood that's going to come after this main trial is over. A lot of people have been given immunity for their testimony. And so they've asked that the people that they're speaking to in reference to that, they only use their first names and not their first and last, because they did with one of the witnesses. They had asked for a mistrial and it was denied. Okay. So Sylvie was up and she explains how you get recruited to DOS and how you move up in ranks. And she was Claire Brofman. She's the Nxivm heiress's slave. Claire Brofman had kind of lured her in with horseback riding. She was an illegal. She was here illegally from England, and she was an avid horse rider. And one of the things that Claire had used as collateral against her was the fact that she didn't have her immigration. Mm. She slept on the floor next to Claire at night, and she testified against all that. She was Keith's second-tier slave, if that makes sense to you now, knowing that there was an inner circle of 8, which included Claire. So the second one would be the slaves of the slave.
The next level.
So she was called a second-tier slave. So she did not have the legal paperwork to ever escape on her own. But she kind of didn't want to. She was everyone who got involved in Nxivm believed that they were there for severe self-help and growth. Did you read most of Sylvie's and what she had testified to and about how you move up in ranks?
Yes.
Okay. Because she was only like a half a day. And then they brought on Mark Vincente. He is a filmmaker, and he's best known for What the Bleep Do We Know? Are you familiar with that film?
Uh-huh. He's an independent. He would be independent then, right?
Yeah, he's an independent filmmaker. So he was a member of Nxivm who worked his way up in the ranks to join a male group, which is comparable to the female subgroup. So remember, there's like 60 other companies. So he was one of the founding fathers of a group called the SOP, the Society of Protectors. And the female equivalent of that was called Geness, J-N-E-S-S. I do not know what the Geness stands for. But above that was more tiers until you're so far gone and you've given so much collateral, you don't even know you're about to be locked into DOS. So that's how that all goes. And Sylvie works through that before they brought in Mark. So he starts talking about how the male part is introduced with that. He is being called the hero of this story. He was the first one. When this first broke, there was a lot of independent reporters up in Albany trying to break through with this to help get people to escape the cult. And it wasn't until him as a filmmaker and this woman named Sarah Edmondson decided to show a picture of her branding, because they would brand Keith Raniere and Allison Mack's initials, even though they didn't know that that's what it was. They were told that it was like mountain and water and this. It wasn't anybody's initials. But inside DOS, one of the things you would have to do was go through this branding ceremony, and they would brand the initials on them. But by the time you're already up there, it's too late. You don't realize that you've given so many naked photos. You've given away your property. You've signed away. In some cases, Allison Mack had given away all her earthly possessions. If she had any property that was left to her or anything, everything went to Keith Raniere in like a will, bizarre will.
And when they branded them, didn't they tie them down?
They tied them down, and they didn't use a brand, which probably would have been kinder. They used a cauterizing pin.
Ooh. Yeah.
Like almost like a soldering iron kind of thing, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. That's exactly what it is.
Almost like death by 1,000 cuts. I mean, that'd take forever to brand somebody.
Yeah, definitely. Plus, to be in a room with everybody else is being branded and the smell of cooking skin.
Oh God, yeah.
So Mark was high up in the ranks. I'm sorry.
Were these people on drugs?
No, actually, no. They were just believed in what they were doing, that they were giving themselves to a greater cause beyond themselves. And it was
So they
last
were,
week,
so
but I
were
don't
they,
want to
what
skip
about,
ahead.
okay, what about any kind of other things like, yeah, I mean, you're talking about programming of some sort.
Well, there's reprogramming, and they even
Right.
started devising, later on you start to find out about the different things that they open. They open daycare centers that were very pricey to start training the children from very, very young, starting at 2 years of age, to what they were trying to do.
But no hypnosis or other things, just
Well, they get into that, but they get into that much later. There were there's some real, it's beyond unbelievable what they did. There was,
We'll have to lay out the case in a legal, what makes legal sense. We have to
sure the
start
flow.
with, we have to start with where it came from, who was involved, how it happened, and then the what happened.
well, they were also conducting these brain reactions on some of the women to see, how they would react to whether they would be able to be a part of DOS. So when they were somewhere down on this rung, part of one of their challenges would be to sit in this room where they would watch a snuff film, people getting beheaded, like real life killings and stuff like that. But at the same time, their brain was being scanned to see how they reacted to it. But it was also to kind of figure out who could handle being in the next part of DOS. And being part of DOS came with a heavy price, because they would use you in some cases. When we get into the part about the Mexican president's son and a few other people, they would use these women to go in and seduce certain people to get collateral on them, to get blackmail on them, to get them to do what they wanted. They had access to, so through the Brofman, which I'm totally off script now, but
Okay.
Brofman, it was Claire Brofman and Sarah. Even though it's spelled Sarah, they pronounced it Sarah. So Claire Brofman, her father was the Seagram heiress mastermind, and he had all the fortune. Okay, but he was also part of this international Jewish coalition. Do you know what I'm talking about? I forget which page it's on now that I'm off script. That's why I wanted to bring it up with the other way. Edgar Brofman Sr. He was the man so he had all these involvements in the WJC, which is the World Jewish Congress. So he had all these political global contacts, and it was Sarah who was able to get close to, him and hack into his computer, which hacked into all sorts of other heavy politicians' computers globally, and she was able to get collateral. One of the evidence that they argued during the first 2 weeks of the trial about whether it was going to be introduced or not was about 18 boxes of files that were found in one of the homes of Claire Brofman. And a lot of New York politicians' files were in there. So what they would do is they hack, they find something that they can use, and then they take one of their women in, maybe an underaged one that they can get in with Schumer and get blackmail on him to use, and then they can get certain things done, or they can get people out of jail. They can get people to look the other way of the crimes that are being committed in Albany. So they use that as a means to be able to conduct business. I hope I'm explaining it right.
Right. So they created their own leverage.
Completely, they did. And they had it on so many people. Back in 2007, when Hillary Clinton was primarying Barack Obama, there's a article out there. I forget whether it's the New York Post or the New York Times that did an article that was called Hillary's Cult Following is, and it was way back when it was just rumors about, oh, it's just cult. Oh, it's just a cult. They're just granola crunchers, and they had gotten, each Claire had taken, because she had a ton of money, contributed the maximum contributable amount under all the DOS and different Nxivm people until she was able to bundle. So she illegally bundled a ton of money for Clinton back then. So there's a lot of connections that are being made at this trial that there's no, I understand why the mainstream media is not covering it, because it connects to too many things that.
Okay. I don't want to interrupt you, but I just wanted to let you know that I went back because you said you didn't know what Jeunesse was, like what it stood for or anything. Well, there's an active site. It's www.jeunesse.com, and it's actually their website. It's a women's movement that facilitates an ongoing exploration of what it means to be a woman. Mm-hmm. Wink, wink. And it says, what does Jeunesse mean? The meaning of Jeunesse is still being realized. Every woman is part of that discovery. Like, how bizarre is this, right? And they actually still have a Facebook presence.
They believe that they're still conducting business.
And Keith Raniere is listed as a scientist, just so you know.
Well, he was in the Guinness Book of World Records at one time for having the highest IQ in the world. He also was able to get the Dalai Lama to come speak at one of his Vanguard events that they hold annually for his birthday, which gave him a lot of clout. And he's been connected to a couple of other self-help gurus that are very close with the Obama family.
Well, for a guy who's really smart, he's really stupid. They actually have pictures. Congratulations to the graduating class of Jeunesse 2 in Mexico City. Pictures, it's got to be like 100, 150 women. They were holding classes. And somebody says, yeah, these people are psychos. Watch Cults and Extreme Belief on Hulu. This is crazy. They have all these women in these pictures. This is nuts.
And it's so
active. I didn't mean to backtrack, but it's
no. It's just like, one drug dealer stands down, another one's going to come up.
Yeah.
The presidents of Mexico's son and daughter, and the head of their media mogul's daughter, are all wrapped up in the Mexico Nxivm operation down there. Remember, there's one in London, there's one in Vancouver. They're everywhere. Look, and everywhere there are.
They ran Acorn out of business, and what did Acorn do? It just splintered and created a whole bunch of little baby acorns with fake names or different names. It's going to be the same thing. So Nxivm, they're on trial, but that doesn't mean they're dead.
Well, they just diversify and hide.
Yeah, doesn't mean they're out of business. Is all I'm saying.
So they splinter. Okay.
So
I'm sorry. I sideswiped you, Jenny.
No, so we're on day 3. And Mark Vinsante is testifying.
Might be a 6-part episode.
We're going to be here until like 2026.
Yeah. On page 1. Okay, so he was Mark was high up in the ranks at Nxivm globally. We know that he came across as clear, concise, and intelligent on the stand, and ultimately broke down after his 3rd day of testimony. When reading the mission statement of the group, he called it a farce, a lie. It was it was really, really sad. And all I was doing was reading it. I can't imagine what it was being in the courtroom. The defense attorney really pushed him and a couple of other witnesses too far, which isn't going to help Keith in the end. Not that we want to, but he's made 2 out of the 3 witnesses so far break down on the stand.
Now, this is not being filmed. They're having to do everything by what? Chalk drawings and notes?
Correct. They're not allowed to even take notes out of the courtroom.
So somebody's getting a transcript, I know.
Correct, but they're not allowed to link to the transcripts. They're only allowed to translate them. And right now I currently have 3 sources.
So the Frank report.
But the Frank report's good because they allow other people who are sitting in the room to comment, and they're telling you, I'm a court watcher here too. I'm seeing it. There were 2 women that ended up committing suicide that Keith kind of covered up, even though there's people still think something happened with that. One of the women, her sister, is all over the Frank Report blogs. She wants justice for her sister. They found her in a lake in Canada. So anyways, he testifies for a few days. He talks about the global real estate that they bought, including Wakaya Island in Fiji, and restaurants and other properties worldwide. They had everything. They had restaurants, they had hotels, they had all, and it was all global.
Crazy.
The island was bought under Alex Betancourt, Claire Brofman, and Keith Raniere. Although Keith Raniere, they keep saying, one of the other charges that they're going to be bringing up on him is for tax evasion. He's never claimed in the last 10, 15 years $1 in tax.
Oh, wow.
So, and he always said, I never owned anything. But it was because he was putting everything in everybody else's name except for this island, except for the island of Fiji, because you don't have to claim that here. And he would then make them give that back to him in collateral. So if they ever took the fall legally, it was on them. So Mark then goes on to detail how they used a strategy to handle anyone who tried to leave the cult, including those. There's a couple names that aren't going to make any sense, but there's the lawsuit against Rick Ross, Stephanie Franco, and others, a lawsuit against Jim Adato, Suzanne Anderson, Tony D'Italia, Joe O'Hara, and Nxivm attempt to intervene in Susan Doan's bankruptcy case, a lawsuit against Barbara Boucher. Barbara Boucher is going to be coming up heavily over the next couple of weeks, which we probably won't get to until episode 18. Barbara Boucher was one of his closest girlfriends, and she was one of the first. They called them the Nxivm 9. The Nxivm 9 was the first group to leave Nxivm. And it created a whole restructuring of the program. And that's when they brought Emilio from Mexico in as part of the executive group. It was after Barbara left. And when she started trying to take other people out of the cult, they decided to go after her legally to just financially disable her and stop her from doing anything.
So they had their own little Brexit.
Yes. Now, it's worth it to be noted, Barbara Boucher, there were 3. There were the other 2 women, Pam Caffritz, and I forget the other one right now, but they're both deceased. They both died early from cancer, and people believe it was because Keith Raniere, his DOS slaves were required to keep a certain weight limit, and it was a weight limit just before you're about to lose your period. He would tell them like 100 pounds. And he would say, when people said, well, they're getting too skinny, he would say, they still have their period. They're fine.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, because menses will cease once you go into starvation mode.
Yes. Now, Mark went on to talk about the division of Nxivm that was overseeing the brain studies. You had asked earlier before we came on, the brain studies program alone started in 2005.
Okay.
So he starts detailing that Keith's first pyramid scheme that was closed down by the feds, called CBI, Consumers Byline Inc. But when the company expanded its operations into Arkansas, representatives from Bill Clinton came to him and demanded kickbacks for allowing the company to operate there. When Raniere refused to pay, Clinton organized the attorney generals in several states to go after Raniere and shut down CBI. Mark himself says he recruited people in power in the entertainment and media industries, bringing in more than 50 such recruits. He also recruited generally everyday people as well, and eventually had more than 2,000 people in his organization within Nxivm. That's just Mark Vincente.
Wow.
He went on, he talked about Vanguard, which I think I touched on a little bit. He describes it as a corporate retreat in upstate New York, near Lake George. And perhaps the most shocking part of his testimony was when he described the filming he did in a town of LeBaron in Mexico. Although the film was primarily about how the community of LeBaron had risen up to challenge a cartel that had kidnapped one of its members, that was not the most important part of the story. LeBaron, as it turns out, was a Mormon community that was populated by families that had been kicked out of the Mormon church in Utah because they refused to stop practicing polygamy. And never wanting to miss a chance to recruit more young women for his cult, Raniere directed that a special education program be created for the girls of just that community. This special program, which was directed by Rosa Laura Junco, we'll get to her later. She's totally involved in the Mexican stuff and deals with opening all these schools, including the Rainbow Program, which is for the little children. That's the program that brought 11 young Mexican girls to Clifton Park, New York in early 2017 to be mentored by Keith Raniere himself, privately. He did his mentoring in the basement of Rosa Laura's mansion in Clifton Park at his library, and they give the address. And we'll never know what mentoring happened, but the girls all described him to be creepy, and they abruptly returned to Mexico 5 months later.
How young were these girls?
Well, they actually get really young. We have 12 to 15 with the three younger sisters, but these went down to as low as 11.
Oh boy.
There's a couple of Jane Does that they have that they talk about will or will not be testifying. The ones that are Jane Does are the very, very young ones.
And these are these parentless? In other words, these children are being represented probably by an odd litem or someone?
Actually, and we get into it a little bit more. I believe we get into it when Lauren testifies. There were three sisters, three Mexican sisters, all very young, and the parents actually encouraged them to join the program. Nobody ever told each other they were all having sex with Keith, but he kept one of them that he called the Virgin. I think her name was Camila, Danny, and Mariana, the three Spanish sisters, and he was having sex with all of them at one time. So he saved one of the sisters until she hit her 18th birthday, and her gift was him taking away her virginity for her. So now we're on day 3.
Were there any babies that came out of any of this activity?
Well, they actually do go into that. It's quite sad. They called it what's that movie? They had a special name for the Avatar baby. They all wanted to have his special Avatar baby, and it was an honor if they could. So he would use that as a way. But then like Lauren Salzman, she wanted to have his baby so bad, but he wouldn't allow it. So they actually introduced onto record the abortion records for all the women he made have abortions. And part of their journey was they would have to have an ultrasound, and after the abortion that he made them have, they would have to carry around a photo of the baby after the abortion.
Heard about that.
Okay. Sorry, this is a live show and my dog likes raccoons. Okay, so Vincente said that during his time at Nxivm, he was concerned with the way Keith was running it. One of his concerns was about Keith sleeping with members, but he didn't find out about that until one of his weeks at Vanguard. Another was how the company had spent money. Apparently, it was complete chaos with who got their commission check and how that was all run. He was also concerned about what he described as criminal behavior. He goes on to describe the first fallout and people leaving the cult. They were the original Nxivm 9, the inner circle, and a trusted part of the group, which included Barbara Boucher. At that time, a new executive board was appointed. The new board included Emilio Solanas, that he's the son of the ex-Mexico president, Alex Betancourt, Claire Brofman, Lauren Salzman, and Nancy Salzman. It's worth noting that Nancy Salzman, Lauren was her daughter, and they were both sleeping with Keith. They were both part of the inner circle of DOS. So much. And they both had their own slaves. No, they did.
No, but what you're seeing here is a pseudo family.
Yeah.
So they've replaced the core family with a psychological
But
pseudo
that's
family.
really what a cult is.
Right. I'm just,
Yeah.
I think that is worth pointing out.
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost, it's not much different than like street gang affiliation.
Correct.
Well, he testified that even though the executive board was responsible for the company's overall policies, it could not make policy changes. Ultimate authority and ultimate decision-making rested on Keith alone. And that's because Keith was seen as the wisest person.
What's interesting about this, just getting back to what Emma was saying, usually when there's a cult affiliation, it attracts people who are disenfranchised, who are separated from their families, or these people came with their families, many of them.
Yes, he got the whole families involved.
Yeah, I mean, it's so bizarre, right?
Even, you know who Catherine Oxenberg is?
Yes.
Her daughter, India,
became, right?
Yeah, Catherine from Dynasty.
Right.
And her mother is the Queen of Portugal?
Yeah, some other country. I can't remember, but yeah.
She's a queen of a country. I believe it's Portugal, but there's so many details. It's hard to remember.
It was something like in Northern Europe.
Okay, so anyways, Catherine
Yugoslavia. Her mother was Princess Elizabeth of Yugoslavia.
So the Princess of Yugoslavia, came here and was helping Catherine. So India got recruited by Allison Mack, and she became Allison Mack's slave. But she was also became just enamored and infatuated and in love with Allison Mack. And she she's like, Mom, you got to try this stuff. It's great. So her mom started taking classes with her, and her mom was like, yeah, there's something weird going here. So she recognized, I got to get my daughter's in a cult, got to get her out of the cult. Her and her mother worked tirelessly to try to get India out of the cult. But they were unsuccessful with that. So he goes on to talk about Emilio Solanas, how he's the son of the former Mexican president Carlos Solanas de Gortari. Solanas served as the vice president of Porpoise Capital, a financial consortium with ties to Keith Raniere and Nxivm. This guy's just he's the vanguard of Mexico. He goes on to talk about the inner circle and the financials for the Mexican branch, as well as the strategies that they used, including shunning, penance, and feedback. So if you were being shunned in the community, nobody was allowed to talk to you. Penance could be a cold shower. Penance could be, there was a girl that was locked in a room for 2 years. Her story is so compelling and sad. There were attempts to curry favor with the Clintons. This is all his testimony. And the New York State Senator Joe Bruno, along with a strong desire to connect with other people in politics. And Nancy spent a lot of time with Joe Bruno. They discussed the illegal bundling campaign contributions for Hillary campaign, via which Nxivm members donated to Clinton and received illegal reimbursements from Claire. Vincente testified about a promotional video he made for V-Week. He was asked to remove a portion of it because a woman named Nicole appeared in it. She's one of the Jane Does in the case. She's one of the underage ones. The one she was tied down and blindfolded while another underage young slave named Camilla performed oral sex on her as Keith watched. She is expected to testify. Nicole, Vincente was told, was on a mission where it would be dangerous as she was seen in the video. That secret mission was to seduce the son of Esther Chiapone Carlson. We'll get into the Chiapone fortune later and why that's important. So Vincente edited the video and took out Nicole. So he did what he asked. Now remember, Vincente was recording everything as per as per Keith Raniere, Keith wanted himself recorded all the time. And him and Mark made a good match because he was a filmmaker and he recorded him all the time. But then he would go back and say, take this out because he needed to hide certain things. So prominent past and present clients include Linda Evans, Richard Branson, TV actress Kristen Cruick, Sheila Johnson, co-founder of Black Entertainment Television, Antonio Novella.
Oh my God.
Former Surgeon General of the United States, Stephen Cooper of Enron. That's coming up again. And Ana Cristina Fox, daughter of former Mexican President Vicente Fox. He goes on to explain collateral and readiness drills. SOP Complete was the special training program that was open to both men and women. It was run like a boot camp, and it included discipline and hazing. It was 6 days long. The idea was to give women the experience of being a little boy in a man's world. For example, women were often told to man up and stop crying. You had to sit up straighter or get singled out. Planks were used as punishments. There were consequences, nicknames, and costumes such as fairy wings and princess tiaras. Claire Brofman was given a jock strap to wear for thinking she was in charge of things. Esther Chiapone Carlson, we just mentioned her. Nicole was sent to seduce her son to get collateral, okay? She had an issue with this misogynistic training, and Raniere had to talk her down. Remember, she was the one who was not trusted. They named her as not trusted, and why they were seducing her son to garner more collateral over her to keep her quiet and in check since she knew too much of the inner workings. Vicente believed that SOP Complete was created to help women feel stronger, but he noticed these women became shells of themselves as they were beaten into submission. Vicente said that the women were obedient to men in a way that was dangerous. It broke them. It was not good for them. Vicente had a discussion with Laura Salzman about having a baby. This is where we get into the stuff you were asking me about before.
Sure.
Although Lauren really wanted a baby, Keith insisted that she was not ready to become a mother. There was an obsession with weight among the women. Women became pale and unhealthy, eating the same low-calorie food all the time. They looked terrible. You could see their bones. Mariana, Nikki Klein, and Sylvie were all very thin. Vicente was concerned. So this is when Mark started to realize there's something really wrong with these women, and he's ready to start confronting to find out what's wrong. So this is right before he decides he needs to exit. He was concerned that Allison Mack was dropping so much weight that she always appeared tired and malnourished. Vicente talked to Keith expressing his concern, and Keith said, well, she's still getting her period.
Now, are all these people living under the same roof or compound somewhere?
Yes, in different places, but yes, for the most part, yes. So they had different areas, but they would always get together. And even if they weren't there together, there was still daily contact. You would still have to send Keith a naked picture of yourself every day.
Okay, so they might have an independent domicile, and some of them were actually in a compound, is what you're saying. So
well, they would go to certain places. Like at some point, they had they finally bought a house for, they called it the sorority house, where the DOS slaves all had to meet up. And I forget if it was every week or every month, but the inner DOS had to meet up, take a naked picture of themselves, all showing their branding, and send it to Keith. And they all had to smile when they were doing it. They had to look very happy about this. And there were times when Keith would arrange to meet them at the sorority house, and they would all have to disrobe and sit obediently in front of him on the floor while he told them lessons.
I pulled up Catherine Oxenberg's daughter.
India.
Yeah, I was just curious because this Catherine Oxenberg was on Dynasty and Linda Evans was on Dynasty, and I just wanted to, I don't know, it just made me look.
Yeah, well, because they bring people in that they know.
Right.
So chances are India may have recruited Linda when she brought her mother. Maybe Linda came with. They had a lot of actors.
It sounds like Linda was there in advance of her, but be that as it may, Oxenberg says she confronted India about the branding, and she said, yeah, I've been branded, but she didn't think there was a problem with it. And she told her, Catherine Oxenberg told her that the brand was Keith's initials, and India was surprised. She said, oh, I thought it was a Latin symbol. And I said, you mean you didn't know what's marked on your body permanently? And India replied, whatever it was, it didn't matter. They were told whatever it was would be strengthening.
But
this is how indoctrinated they were.
But the branding was done in a place that you couldn't see it if you were just looking at them on the street. Most of it looked like the one film that I saw, they're laying prostrate with people holding onto their arms and legs, and it's done like on the bikini line to one side below the hip.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it'd be like at the front pocket level on your body.
Well, I think what happened was Oxenberg learned about it through other people.
Uh-huh.
And then she just confronted her, and she said, yeah, I've been branded. What's the problem? It's been a good experience for me.
Huh.
All right, we're almost at lunch break. And then the next day they introduced the videos of Keith and his sex slayer, and that's probably where we're going to have to wrap episode 1.
Okay, that's fine.
So at one point, Keith said he was trying to break Allison to Vincente. And Vincente said he never got clear answers from Keith about why India was so unhealthy. I go into who she is, but we already covered that.
So are there other alternatives to how their income got? Because once you give over all your belongings to somebody, there has to be a perpetuity of some income that's coming in after that. You give everything.
Well, that's the pyramid scheme where you're recruiting other members, and you're taking classes, and they're paying you for those classes, and you're giving them instruction in those classes.
Okay.
And through that, they narrow down who's getting moved up. That's how you move up through it, is by taking these classes. Not everybody who joined was able to even get to the level where they could. And thank goodness for some of them.
The Bronsons were like $200 million.
Yeah. Well, they just ran through $200 million just in legal expenses of the Nxivm fortune.
Yeah, $65 million lost in the commodities market.
He was using their plane. They bought islands. That there was no shortage of cash.
He broke the promise.
This is only day 3. The financials haven't come yet. You're gonna some of this stuff is just gonna blow your mind. Like, they were building a sex slayer. It's crazy. So Vincente said he became of Keith's sexual relationships with women when Barbara Jeske died. Barbara Jeske, Pam Caffritz, and Barbara Boucher were the first 3 main girlfriends of Keith's before the 8. Keith said it was like losing a wife. Vincente also said Mariana conceived with Keith. Now, remember, she's one of the 3 first Spanish sisters who came over with her parents. Which would have been around the time that Pam Caffritz died. So she got pregnant when Pam died. But Vincente didn't become aware of the harem of over 20 women until after he left Nxivm. He was more concerned about what was happening with this one other woman who we'll get into. Vincente was aware that Keith was always touching and kissing women. He said that Keith was very touchy-feely with women, touching and kissing them on the lips at the center, which Vincente thought was inappropriate in a corporate environment. Vincente said that India had a close relationship with Mac, who took India under her wing. India had big dreams. She wanted to have a talk show where she would interview the world's most interesting people, and she wanted to do cool things with cooking. But after she went on a walk with Keith, she changed her focus and gave up all those dreams. Vincente was concerned that India was becoming enamored with Allison Mack, like she was falling in love with her. He didn't think it was healthy. They go to lunch break, and the following day, they introduce all the videos that Mark made of Keith and his sex slayer. So I guess we can talk about that for the next 10 minutes, because that's a good place to end.
It's a good place to end, yeah.
So if he's introducing all these videos, that means that the jury's going to have to watch all them, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Now, is that a closed courtroom except for specific so people are not walking in and out, just the man on the street can't come sit and watch all that, right?
No, there's only very few people. There's very strict rules in this courtroom, especially because the case involves minor children.
Right.
So,
This is
like,
right here in Brooklyn, right?
yes, federal court in Brooklyn. That's why I've been following a couple of people on Twitter who are there. Who it's taking them a few days now to get the transcripts, so they're a couple of days behind on it. They're not allowed to link to the transcripts. They have to leave any notes they take in the room.
Mm-hmm.
So they have to do it all from memory or wait till they get the transcripts.
So the transcripts come in what way? Are they printed or are they electronic? Do you know?
I believe I've heard electronic, but I may be incorrect on that.
Why the secrecy? Why the protection of all the witnesses? Why? Who are we protecting?
The trial, probably, so that there's not a mistrial to really get this one.
Okay, yeah,
I
because
would
we've already had so many.
Think about how far-reaching this is.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering how high up this goes and where it's going to end up.
I'm a little further past already, so I know about the illegal shipping containers in California that were busted by somebody who's connected to the Real Housewives of I forget which town. I believe it's California. And her husband was an attorney. He's involved in all this stuff, shipping containers. He's involved in medical supplies, and he's got stuff connected.
Tentacles.
So that they've also started lightly connecting it, even though we already know it's going to Jeremy Epstein with
Jeffrey
Express.
Jeffrey Epstein, yeah.
Which is why this is expressly why the media is not covering it, but it deserves to be. So hopefully,
I went before we started tonight. I went out for a walk, and I put on a T-shirt when I went walking. When I came home, I was going to change my T-shirt before the show, and then I thought, you know what, I'm going to leave this on, and there's a reason, because nobody knows this story. Nobody, how many people do you see talking about Nxivm, right? It's dead in the media. There's little rumblings here and there, nothing. But this was major freaking news when the song and the whole Me Too movement.
oh,
Okay? This was splattered everywhere, right?
It's a distraction.
and abortion is in the news right now, and here they are introducing abortion records of forced abortions, and nobody's
talking about it.
It's insanity to me.
This should be the lead story on every news program.
Well, this leads into the, what is it? The Mockingbird media, which shows you the control it has over what, just by either omissions or commissions of what the people get to know.
Mm-hmm.
So if Jennifer hadn't told me about Nxivm, I'd be like, nothing, because there's nothing in my region of I'm seeing anything.
You would never know.
Yeah, other than some other small sources.
And Mexico's right below you, like you're
Exactly.
right. And there's 3 hubs in Mexico and 1 in Guatemala City.
Half of these people probably passed right through El Paso.
Oh, sure. Well, among the other 1,000 people that came running through here in the last day, you've seen that.
Yes.
Right?
And how many of those children were already absconded and used in some of these experiments?
God only knows, exactly.
Well, we know that by DNA testing, 1/3 of the young children that are claimed as a family member to someone coming through here are not related to the person claimed. So 1/3, that's just 1/3 so far.
That's crazy.
Okay, we don't know about the other people that have been turned loose, because this just began within the last 2 weeks.
This case is so pertinent to everything that's going on right now.
Well, and now of course, and what as a touch on that, we know also that family members were offering up their children as partial payment to the coyotes and the gangs to get their amount to have passage through to the country. It was just basically tossing their children to the side and going, here, you take this and give me a bargain.
Yep, and they use them as a brain experiment for this shell company. Or other things. I mean, there's so many other things they could use these children for.
Yeah. A lot of them were just killed. So, that's
well, death is what happens after abused and
After they're used, right?
they're used. So, okay, so we are going to end this episode of Nxivm, but we are going to come back with another episode. And
but you're only up to day 3.
Day 3, yes.
To the lunch break.
We're at the lunch break of day 3.
Well, except you said then they came back and watched all the movies of the.
We're still in the middle of Mark Vinsante's testimony, and he testified for 3 days, and then they will go into this other one of the other girls. So, but we'll get together really soon, and we will do part 2. But for now, thank you everyone for watching, and we will be back with Nxivm part 2. Thank you.
As the Nxivm turns.
Say goodnight, ladies.
Good night, ladies.